Hello, my love. Today we're going to talk about how to reprogram your brain so that you don't destroy everything every time things start going well in your life. Honestly, this one is going to be quite therapeutic for me, considering I just came out of a nice little cry session where I talked myself through exactly what I'm about to talk you through right now. I decided that 2024 was going to be the year that I was going to completely transform my life. Like, I wanted to become an unrecognizable version of myself. And to be honest, the work that I've been putting in is unmatched. Like, no past version of me has ever put in the type of effort and consistency that I've been putting in. But honestly, that's not even the main difference between this version of me and past versions of me. Older versions of me would put in some work and would start making a little bit of progress, but she would feel discouraged that things weren't happening as quickly as she wanted them to. And what would end up happening is she would tell herself this story. See, things are just not meant to work out. See, you're trying and you're not actually succeeding. Like, it's so trippy to realize that because I had believed that things weren't actually going to work out and that I was foolish to even think I could do those things, I would actually stop trying or slow down and then inevitably make that the reality. But the craziest part is I would assume that things didn't work out because I was right. Things are not supposed to work out. Not because I decided to believe in that and then make that happen. When I first started getting into manifestation, I started really reading a lot of Joe Dispenza's books. The reason I love Joe Dispenza is because he takes something that I felt was super mystical and he makes it based in science. The thing that he talks about the most is neurons that fire together, wire together. And what that means is when you are having the same neurological pathways in your brain fire in specific ways, then those same neurons are going to wire together. And what happens is you have developed this neurological pathway, and it is so difficult to change that neurological pathway once it's become cemented. I'm not a scientist, I haven't studied this, but I've read a lot about it, and I don't want to get too scientific for no reason. So the metaphor that actually helped me a lot when I was getting into this is imagining yourself plowing, like taking a plow through an open field. If you're taking that plow through the same path over and over and over and over again, there's going to be less resistance every time your truck or whatever drives over that path. But common sense would tell us that if you took the plow onto open land where no one had, driven before, it would obviously be so much more difficult for you to drive over that because you're creating that pathway for the first time. This is why, my love, moments that we're experiencing, like what I just experienced today, are not your enemy. These days, when you are feeling so frustrated, the days when it actually feels the most difficult for you to persevere are the days where you're basically showing yourself that you're carving a new neural pathway and you are literally becoming a new version of yourself. I think that's why I love the title of his book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, because that's exactly what you're doing. You have been programmed in a specific way, and anytime you do actions that go against that program, you are starting a new program. And in order to make that the new normal, you need to try to be as persistent and consistent as possible. And it is going to feel very challenging. That's basically what happened to me today. I usually, make progress with certain goals that I have for a few weeks, and it's feeling good for those few weeks. But then there reaches this point of discomfort where the old version of me usually stops in her tracks, feels like she hasn't made enough progress, and then tells herself this story that it's not meant to happen for me, so why even try? And then what happens is I think that that's literally how my neurons are wired, is when it's kind of like coding. It's like when you realize you have not made it as far as you would like, then turn back around and walk in the other direction. And so instead of seeing that I'm making a conscious decision to stop carving out that pathway, the story that I tell myself is you cannot ever make it past this point. I don't tell myself the story that, no, you just never decide to push past this point. And what has been happening recently with me, because I do feel like I've become a version of me that my past self can't even recognize or really even identify with, is I no longer allow those beliefs to go unchecked. This is something I've been talking a lot about, is this idea of like making your internal narrator a friend. But a good, like you want to be a good friend. You don't want to be that friend that just lies and says that you think her outfit is cute when you don't. You want to be that good friend that's like, no, no, don't wear that. Wear this instead. No, no, he actually doesn't really like you. You want to be the friend that puts her in check and calls her out on her BS. Today was honestly so scary. I'm not even gonna lie to you. And I think I cried because I finally realized that I used to just stop in my tracks and turn around. And I almost did that today. But because I've been able to have this back and forth conversation with the voice in my head, I understand that I'm making a choice. I don't need to let my beliefs and my feelings dictate everything that I do the way that I used to. And so I think what was happening is my neurons were trying to fire a specific way, but because I'm now so conscious of the thoughts that I'm having, I don't just allow them to do whatever they want. I just pull back and try to reroute them. And that is so challenging, but I think I did it. One of the things that I randomly instituted at the beginning of this year was doing one thing every single day that surprises me. And it could be something so tiny. Like, I'll give you a funny, cute example of when we were in Dubai and my brother has a dog and you have to walk the dog multiple times a day. The old version of me tends to be like the lazy one, the one that like you can't ask her to get up off the couch when she's already like seated and settled. And so it was 1 a.m. and we realized we hadn't taken the dog out in a couple of hours and we really needed to before we went to sleep because the dog was still getting potty trained. So they're like, oh my God, we need to take the dog out. And I just volunteered to do it. I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to surprise myself every day. This would be very surprising for me and everybody involved. So let me just take this opportunity to surprise myself. It's funny, like I volunteered to do it. I was really a good sport about it and everyone was shook. They're like, oh my God, who is this new version of you? And that was actually the whole reason that I started that little challenge of doing something every day that surprises me, because I just don't want to feel cemented in anything anymore. I don't want to feel like anything needs to be true forever about me if I don't want it to be. If someone knows me as someone who is typically lazy or introverted, and I decide one day that I don't want that to be the reality for me, I want to feel like I'm empowered to change that at any given moment. Don't get me wrong, most things about me I love, and so I don't want to change them. But the fact remains, if I did want to change them, I could. And so that's basically the entire premise of rewiring your brain and reprogramming your brain. And it's so fun to do that with things that feel very light and there's not so much baggage attached to them. And honestly, those little things like challenging the notion that you're lazy or challenging the notion that you can't put the speed up on a certain number, on the treadmill every day when you work out. Challenging those tiny things that feel safe and doable have been such great practice for me, challenging the things that actually feel super difficult. The things that feel kind of like this neurological addiction that you feel stuck in. Literally just stepping into the version of you that surprises herself in itself is so powerful, because you start to become addicted. Like it becomes this game of how can I surprise myself? And then no belief that is currently in your head holds any power over you, because you have so much evidence. You've built so much evidence that you can change. Yeah, I used to say that I was one of those girls that couldn't wear heels or couldn't walk in heels, but look at me now. I used to say that I was one of those girls that didn't know how to do makeup, but look at me now. I used to say that I was one of those girls that hated running, but look at me now. That look at me now moment, for me at least, was something that I wanted to be the story for 2024. And I wanted this year to be the year where I challenged all the things that I no longer wanted to be true about myself. I wrote this poem when I was actually trying to get out of like a toxic relationship that really felt like an addictive cycle to me at the time. And when I decided for sure that it's done, after 4 years of me going back and forth, I wrote this short poem and it said, when old mindsets, old habits, and old people try to get you to revert back to old ways, remind yourself that you're different now. Just that sentence of like, I'm different now, in itself was so liberating to me, because it's almost like I needed my own permission to remind myself who we've just became. This is not what we do. I had a moment like that today. In retrospect, now that I'm out of it, I feel so grateful for, because I can now see it as this opportunity to remind myself that we're different now. But in that moment, it didn't feel like that. In that moment, it was scary, because I truly saw, like I pulled myself out of it and I saw myself going back to that neural pathway or programming that I had worked so hard to pull myself out of. We make this mistake of empowering our beliefs so much so that we're scared to confront them. We think that if we just pretend that we didn't have this thought, if we pretend that we don't have this negative belief system about how our life is supposed to go, if we're dreading something that we think might happen, but we just don't give it any thought, we think that we're actually doing ourselves a service by disempowering that belief. When in reality, what you don't understand is if you allow that belief to just sit in your head and occupy space, going unchecked, you're actually empowering that belief and ensuring that it dictates your actions. If that belief springs up and if it's familiar enough to where you're like, oh, I've been here before, I'm not gonna let this happen again, then chances are that that is the belief that is usually guiding your programming. That is the neuron that just wired to let everything else know how to play out. So one thing that I've been doing lately that the old version of me didn't even really realize she had access to was I've been talking to that voice. I've been treating it, like I said, like a good friend that I'm gonna keep in check. And so when she says things that I'm like, where did you get that from? I will challenge her. Like, what is it? Is that based in fact or is that just a feeling? How do you know that this is gonna happen? How do you know that this is not gonna work out? Okay, let's talk about it. And then she'll like have this conversation and be like, you know, last time this happened, da 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 da. I'm like, okay, well, this isn't last time because look at all these other things that we've done differently than before. Or this is a completely different circumstance because this is a different relationship. So I know that this is how it played out in the last one, but you just have to have this informed, logical, facts-based conversation with that voice in your head and let her know who runs the show. I cried honestly out of relief. I was so proud of myself for stopping that voice in her tracks and having this dialogue. And I say it felt scary because it allowed me to zoom out and realize, you mean to tell me all those times I've tried and failed and tried and failed, it didn't have to be that way. I thought that that was just what inevitably would have happened. When in reality, I willed those results to happen. I made the failure inevitable by allowing that belief to dictate what would happen next instead of stopping her in her tracks and telling her which direction we were actually gonna go in. My love, I feel the need to tell you, you are not a victim. You don't have to wait for anyone to see things your way for you to decide to change right now. I know that you might have had failed relationships in the past. Things don't need to go the same way they went before. You are different now. And because you are different, you can and will do things differently like you never have before. Because you are different, you are with a different person. This isn't your ex. You've chosen and attracted a completely different person because you're different. You need to give yourself more credit. You need to understand that you are so much more powerful than you're letting yourself believe. And that's actually strategic. You don't want yourself to see how powerful you are because something about that terrifies you. And I'll tell you exactly what that is. You're terrified to be powerful because if you were to admit to yourself that you're super powerful, then you would also admit to yourself that you have the responsibility to create the life that you want. But the thing is, you are trying so hard to avoid disappointment. You're trying to avoid the disappointment that you think will be on the other end of you not successfully doing what you want to do. And so instead of taking that responsibility and making it happen, you'd rather guarantee your failure right now so that you could blame it on everything and their mom instead of looking at what you did to guarantee that failure right now. You're not gonna do that because it feels so much easier to just quit while you're ahead than to take the risk of doing something completely different and using your power to create that and risk being disappointed in yourself. I don't know about you, I would rather be powerful and disappointed in myself than pretend that I'm helpless and be disappointed in my circumstances. You're gonna be disappointed regardless. So wouldn't you rather face disappointment potentially from a place of power? Because when you say it out loud, it really doesn't make sense. Like, why would you just choose to be helpless? But we do it all the time. Like, we really genuinely do it all the time. We talk about we haven't seen good relationships growing up, or you know, our ex gave us so much trauma, or I've struggled with body image issues my whole life, or I'm not in an environment where it's easy for me to have a healthy lifestyle. We have so many things that we blame things on. And look, I'm not saying that those things aren't true. All of the above can and will be true for some people. That doesn't mean that that thing needs to have that power over you though. There will always be another another way. But sometimes we don't even allow ourselves to get creative, to think of solutions, because again, that would require us to be in our power. And we would rather pretend that these things have power over us so that we could blame them when things inevitably go wrong. But look, I know for me, I knew I was ready to change it all when the fear of staying in this really uncomfortable, frustrating place far outweighed the fear of trying to get out of it and potentially failing. Like at this point, I need out. And so I'm going to do everything. I'm going to crawl my way out, regardless how hard it feels. And once you start that, honestly, you stop doubting whether or not you're gonna succeed. Because truly the only way you will not get what you want is when you quit. And having that level of certainty that you will get what you want. You will finally get over your toxic ex. You will finally attract healthy love. You will finally get your dream job. You will finally lose the weight and keep it off. When you get to a place where you realize the only way I don't get what I want is when I quit, the process starts to become fun because you know what's on the other end of it. I think one thing I finally realized today is that accepting that discouraging voice in my head and not checking it is actually a form of quitting. Because somewhere deep inside, I am wise enough to understand that if I just allowed that voice to go unchecked, the rest is history. And to me, that's like the most lazy way of even quitting, because I knew what would happen. I knew what would happen if I allowed that voice to go unchecked. And that would have literally been me throwing my hands up in the air and saying, you guys take it from here. I don't want to be responsible for what happens next. And that really scared me. If you're going through it right now, feeling like your old ways are starting to pop up, and you are scared to spiral because you feel like you're losing control, the first thing I want you to do is just observe the dialogue that's happening in your head. Don't try to fight it. Don't try to yell at it. Don't try to, bash it and minimize it. Just observe it. Not to sound like a meditation girly, but really like non-judgmentally observe those thoughts. Let the talk happen. Then I want you to start interjecting like a friend would. Start to challenge some of the beliefs that are popping up. Anytime a belief pops up that kind of implies that you're not the one that's in control, I want you to challenge that belief. I also want you to be fair, the way that you would be fair with a friend. Don't gaslight yourself. Like if there's this thought that popped up, like things are feeling a lot harder than normal lately. If that's true, let it be true. That was actually one of the thoughts that popped up for me. And then I had this other thought that came up, and it was like, but what if things aren't supposed to get easier? What if you're just supposed to get better? And I'm like, oh, that's good. That's good. It's like when you're at the gym, lifting 50 pounds is still going to be 50 pounds, but you're going to get better. And so it will feel easier, but not because the weight is lighter, but because you're just better. And you will actually need to lift heavier weights that do feel challenging for you if you want to tear your muscles and start to grow them. So have that conversation like you would with a friend. Be fair, but be firm, challenge them. Don't let them get away with saying and believing just anything. And when you start to get a sense that this person is trying to relinquish control because they're afraid of what's going to happen, or this person is trying to convince me that there's only one direction we can go from here, then I want you to genuinely sit back and ask yourself, what benefit do I get from believing that this is out of my hands? What am I trying to run away from that is scaring me so much that I'm trying to stop dead in my tracks right now? Something huge that came up for me today is the discomfort is proof that it's working. Think back to the plow analogy. I'm supposed to be uncomfortable. Think back to the metaphor that I just gave you right now about working out. Like when I'm at the gym and it hurts, I don't question that. I actually look at that as proof that I'm lifting the right weight. As long as my form is good and it's challenging, I know I'm in like the optimal weightlifting zone. But when it comes to life, when things start to get challenging, we start to question whether we're doing it right. When in reality, the challenge is literally proof that we are carving out completely new neurological pathways. The challenge is literal evidence that we are going against our programming, because our programming feels like we can do it in our sleep. The same way you brush your teeth in a specific way every single day without really thinking about it, because that is how ingrained in your brain it is. And that is how accustomed you've grown to those old habits. So look at the challengingness of it as proof that you're changing, that you are literally, like Joe Dispenza says, breaking the habit of being yourself, which is naturally going to be more challenging. So not only should the feeling of things being challenging be affirming, But when new things pop up in your life, look at them as opportunities to continue challenging yourself. Look at them as opportunities to continue cementing this version of yourself. And if there are a few of those things that pop up that you don't pass with flying colors, don't feel like everything that you've been working towards, all the momentum that you've worked so hard to build, is so easily reversible. Because it's not. You are investing in this new version of yourself. You're not going to be perfect, but literally every minute of every day is an opportunity to invest in the version of yourself that you want to be and divest from the version of yourself that you're no longer being. Honestly, when I started looking at the process through that lens, it started to really feel like a fun game. It truly felt like I was playing a video game and I was literally just choosing my character and choosing my reality. It made things so much less dramatic. So even on days like today, when it got really uncomfortable and yes, really scary, I now just feel so much better. I feel like, oh, okay, cool, you handled that super well. You had that conversation with the voice in your head. She was really trying to do something today. Today, with the old you, would have been the turning point. That would have been the day where you stopped dead in your tracks and turned back around and walked in the other direction despite knowing that you want to keep going. Today would have been that day, but because of how you chose to handle today and because of how you chose to have that friendly and firm dialogue with that voice in your head, you are now plowing through a completely new path that you've never traversed before. And it is going to feel more uncomfortable. Your legs are going to feel heavier because the ground that you are walking on has never been walked on before. You're literally paving a completely new pathway, literally, neurologically. Like that pathway in your brain, you're paving a new one. And as long as you just wake up every day and choose to continue going and stumbling and getting rerouted and all of that is fine, but as long as you don't turn back and go in the direction of what's comfortable, you are literally creating a new version of yourself. And guess what? That new version of yourself will be able to attract completely new experiences and opportunities and relationships that the old version of you had no access to because she was not a match to that. Get excited about what this new version of you is now a match to that you've never seen before, and do not be surprised when some crazy stuff starts happening in your life. Also look at that as evidence that you're different now. I'm right here with you, okay? A lot of my videos are big sis advice. This is not big sis advice. This is we're right here advice because I'm literally going through it right alongside you, and I completely understand how uncertain and sometimes scary and just uncomfortable it all feels. But once again, that discomfort is just evidence that you're doing it all right. Keep going. I love you so much. And as always, stay powerful, my love.